Perhaps this film will save someone's life. Can one unfortunate incident change the future of several people at once? This complex case became so significant in criminal law that it led to important amendments in legislation. Unfortunately, it did not save a young woman who was preparing for her own wedding. The case of Johna Howberry. Johna Howberry was born in Bristol, Tennessee, on the 26th of August, 1983. She had two biological brothers, Tim and Callie, from her mother's previous marriage. When Johna was 7 years old, her mother remarried, this time to Michael Berry, and Johna took her stepfather's surname. After graduating from school in 2001, Johna began her studies at East Tennessee State University, located about half an hour away from Bristol. She studied psychology and criminology, spending most of her time caring for children at a childcare center. Johna was happy in college, and her parents missed her dearly. They had moved to Atlanta, and whenever their daughter came home for the weekend, she would happily shout that she was home. Her mother, Joan Berry, considered that joyful cry to be the most beautiful sound in the world. Soon, Johna met her peer from university, Jason White. From that moment on, they were inseparable. They were not only dating but were truly in love, planning their future together and applying to law school. During the winter, Jason proposed for the first time. In August, the couple went to the Mendota River. Along the way, they had to cross a suspension bridge. To Johna's surprise, Jason knelt down once again, holding an engagement ring, the same one Johna had left at home, afraid she might lose it. The couple planned their wedding for April 2005. Johna dreamed of a beautiful spring wedding and had already prepared her dress. When the couple moved to Michigan, Johna realized after a few months of studying that she had made a mistake in choosing her field of study. She called her father and said she didn't see herself as a lawyer. Knowing her true passion was caring for children, her father agreed that she could leave her studies. Johna returned to Tennessee to pursue a master's degree in child psychology. Despite her young age, just 21 years old, she was mature, composed, and her parents trusted her. After returning to Tennessee in 2004, she moved in with a close friend, Jason, her friend's boyfriend. Stephen and Kin were both students at the same university. Jason offered Johna a spare room in his apartment until she found her own place in Knoxville. The apartment they shared was located in the Brandon Park complex. It was a lively area filled with shops, shopping centers, cinemas, and cafes. Johna spoke to her boyfriend Jason on the phone every day. The distance didn't stop them from nurturing their love. They often fell asleep talking on the phone, discussing details of their upcoming wedding, eagerly anticipating that special day. Johna worked hard to move into her own apartment as soon as possible. Her main job was at a youth center at Peninsula Hospital. Toward the end of 2004, she took on a part-time job at a jewelry store in a shopping mall. She planned to stay with Jason for a few more months, and with the upcoming holidays, she needed extra money for expenses. On the 5th of December, Johna finished work at around 6 in the evening. After reaching her car, she sat in her convertible and drove off to do some Christmas shopping. She bought many toys for the children she worked with and then returned home. At 10 o'clock in the evening, when her roommate returned to the apartment, Johna was busy wrapping presents for the children from the care center. They talked briefly before each went to their own room. Late that evening, as usual, Johna spoke with her fiancé on the phone, and their conversation ended at around 11:30. Just a few hours later, in the early morning of the 6th of December, 2004, at approximately 4 o'clock, a man ran into a 24-hour store at a gas station, covered in blood, pleading for someone to call 911. That man was Johna's roommate. He said that while he was asleep, someone had broken into the apartment and attacked them with a knife. He had been stabbed in the chest and face, and when he managed to break free, he started to run. Amid the chaos, he heard Johna's screams coming from her bedroom. The girl was screaming loudly, but he had no time to help her, he just ran, seizing the chance to escape. The police and paramedics arrived at the scene very quickly. The emergency team immediately assessed Jason's injuries. He had several stab wounds, but most of them were superficial. One stab wound was to his chest, one to his arm, and there was a serious cut on the ring finger of his right hand. Jason's injuries immediately raised suspicion. The wound on his finger could have been the result of an attack, but it was also a typical injury caused by a slippery knife. When a hand slips on the blade, it can result in a cut. The apartment where Jason and Johna lived was located right next to the road. Their unit was on the second floor, on the right side. The front door to the building was shared by all residents and had no lock. Inside, there were 6 apartments. The officers who responded to the call found Johna Berry's bloodied body at the bottom of the stairwell, just behind the shared entrance door. She was lying face down, but she was still alive. However, she was too weak to answer any questions. The officers went up to the second floor and cautiously entered the apartment. Johna's room was covered in red stains, on the walls, the floor, and the furniture. Later, one of the officers admitted that this crime scene was one of the most gruesome he had ever witnessed. While searching the apartment, one of the officers held Johna's hand and spoke to her before she was transferred to the ambulance. The victim was taken to the hospital in critical condition. Johna's parents, who were in Atlanta, received a call from the emergency department of the University of Tennessee Hospital at 5 o'clock in the morning. They were informed that their daughter had been the victim of a crime and that they needed to get to the hospital as quickly as possible because Johna might not survive. Joan called her 2 sons, Tim and Callie, who were closer to Knoxville, and asked them to go to the hospital immediately. Joan's journey was the longest trip of her life. For the entire 4-hour drive, she prayed that it was all a mistake. The rain that poured non-stop throughout the journey seemed to cry along with her. At the hospital, Johna's brothers were shown a photo of their sister with stab wounds. It was their younger sister, Johna. The parents still clung to hope, but as they arrived at the hospital and got out of the car, they saw their son crying. Michael and Joan immediately understood that what they had heard on the phone was true. Unfortunately, the news was even worse than they had feared. During their journey to the hospital, Johna had passed away. The cause of death was blood loss due to multiple stab wounds. There were approximately 20 of them, on her face, hands, abdomen, chest, and back. The police secured the apartment and began searching for evidence. They noticed that there were no signs of forced entry. Investigators were particularly eager to speak with Johna's roommate. They wanted to know why he had walked for 14 minutes to reach the gas station instead of seeking help from his neighbors. They were also interested in the wound on his hand. Could it have been caused by a struggle with his roommate? Jason was quickly discharged from the hospital and voluntarily reported to the sheriff's office in Knoxville. Detectives were curious about the relationship between the young people living together. The young man assured them that he had never had romantic feelings for Johna since he had a girlfriend. He also described the events of the previous night. According to Jason, he was awakened in the middle of the night by his roommate's screams. He thought she was having a nightmare but decided to check what was happening. When he opened the door to her bedroom, he saw the silhouette of a stranger. Some man was leaving Johna's room. The intruder noticed Jason, grabbed him by the shoulders, and pushed him back into his bedroom. A struggle ensued during which the man had a knife and inflicted all the injuries on Jason. At some point, Jason managed to push the attacker away and run out of the bedroom. He then fled through the front door and ran to the 24-hour gas station. He claimed he ran in panic, trying to avoid being attacked again. It didn't even occur to him to knock on his neighbors' doors. When asked how the intruder had entered the apartment, Jason speculated that it must have been through the back door because he couldn't remember whether he had locked it after taking out the trash. He himself escaped through the front door, which had been closed. Johna usually checked all the locks before going to bed, but Jason didn't know if she had done so that night. The young man was asked to help create a composite sketch of the attacker. The drawing depicted a young man, about 20 years old, with short light brown hair, a square jaw, and drooping eyes. Authorities published the image in the news and waited for a response. Meanwhile, back at the crime scene, officers discovered a piece of cardboard with a partial shoe print on the floor of Jason's bedroom, which they secured as evidence. Based on the bloody fingerprints on the doors of neighboring apartments, investigators concluded that the poor girl had used her last strength in the hope of getting help. Unfortunately, that night no one opened their doors. Johna could have survived if even one person had called emergency services. She cried, screamed, and begged for help, but no one came to her aid. The neighbors were simply too afraid to open their doors. Investigators retraced Johna's path based on the blood trails. After sustaining numerous wounds, she managed to get out of her bedroom and crawl to the living room, where she lost consciousness, as confirmed by a large bloodstain on the floor. Despite her weakened state, she gathered enough strength to get up and leave the apartment. She knocked on her neighbors' doors, but no one answered. She tried another apartment, but once again, there was only silence. Somehow, she managed to make her way down the stairs to the ground floor. Eventually, detectives found the murder weapon, a standard kitchen knife that belonged to Johna and Jason. This led the police to suspect a crime of passion. The investigation returned to its initial theory, that the perpetrator could have been the roommate. There simply were no other suspects. The knife was found just outside Johna's door. It was almost broken in half from the force of the blows. Later, fingerprints, as well as hair and blood, were discovered on the blade. Johna's family and her fiancé looked at Jason with suspicion. No one believed in his innocence. During the investigation, suspicions also fell on Johna's fiancé, Jason White. Despite being in Lansing, Michigan, thousands of kilometers away from the crime scene, at the time of the murder, detectives called him in for questioning as soon as he arrived in town. The detectives interrogated him for 4 hours to determine whether he had any involvement in his fiancée's death. By analyzing his phone records, investigators confirmed that the couple had ended their phone call at 11:30. Physically, Jason could not have traveled from Michigan to Tennessee in such a short time and then returned. This completely cleared him of suspicion. Johna's family and all her friends said the couple was happy and excited about their wedding. Now, however, they were organizing a funeral. 3 days later, Johna was buried in Bristol, Tennessee. She was dressed in her wedding gown and wore her engagement ring. Jason wanted her to keep it forever, and he placed it on her finger one last time. Meanwhile, the forensic lab examined the blood from the apartment and the stairwell. The DNA found at the crime scene belonged to both Johna and Jason. However, there was also a third DNA profile present. Test results confirmed Jason's account. Another person had been present and had also been injured. Traces of the unknown perpetrator were found on the light switch, the murder weapon, near the back door, and on the stairwell. After exhausting interrogations, Jason was relieved that he could finally prove his innocence. Investigators tried to identify the person whose DNA was found, but there were no matches in the database. This meant the perpetrator had no prior criminal record. The composite sketch of the attacker was released to the media, and Johna's family distributed thousands of flyers throughout the city. Johna's father vowed to dedicate the rest of his life to discovering who had killed his daughter. However, the investigation seemed to have reached a dead end. In February 2005, Michael and Joan Berry, in cooperation with the Knox County Sheriff's Office, announced a $10,000 reward for any information. After several months, the reward increased to $75,000, and details of the case were publicized everywhere. After several years, these efforts finally paid off. In 2007, on one of the many highways, a driver noticed a billboard and recognized the sketch as someone he knew, a man named Taylor Olson. Taylor came from a very wealthy family. He was born in 1985 in Eugene, Oregon. He had a 16-month-old son, was a creative individual, wrote remarkable poems, and was a talented artist. Friends said he was passionate about off-road motorcycling and loved animals, especially his beloved dog named Paris. The police arrested Taylor Olson and brought him in for questioning. During his arrest in July 2007, the man voluntarily provided a DNA sample. However, when questioned about Johna's murder, he denied any involvement in her death. Due to delays in the forensic laboratory, it took several months to receive the results. Throughout that time, Taylor Olson remained in custody. Investigators were surprised when, on the 20th of December, 2007, they received a report confirming a full DNA match between Taylor and the blood found at the crime scene. After 2 days of questioning, detectives obtained a confession. The story, however, turned out to be quite unusual. According to Taylor, that night he and his friend had had too much to drink. They attempted to steal a car from the parking lot of the Brandon Park apartment complex, but a neighbor spotted them and chased them away. Taylor's friend ran off, but Taylor decided to stay and continue searching. He tried to get into some apartments to find car keys, but all the doors were locked, except for one. He entered Jason and Johna's apartment through the back door. Using the light from his phone, he began searching for car keys. The keys weren't in the kitchen or the living room. That's when Taylor entered Johna's room. He approached her bed and began searching her nightstand. Suddenly, the girl woke up and stabbed him in the hand with a knife. Investigators didn't believe this version of events. They suspected that Taylor had grabbed the knife while searching the kitchen drawers. When Johna woke up and started screaming, he decided to get rid of the witness who could identify him. Taylor committed this crime in his youth, out of stupidity. That night, he hadn't intended to harm anyone, but excessive alcohol had clouded his judgment. The next morning, he regretted what had happened. Afterward, he tried to forget everything and start his life over. And he might have succeeded if it hadn't been for the relentless determination of Johna's parents, who refused to rest until they found and punished the person who had destroyed the lives of multiple families. Johna's parents, who had dreamed for so long of seeing their daughter's murderer on trial, never got that chance. On the 24th of March, 2008, Taylor Olson was found dead in his prison cell. He left this world 4 months before his trial was set to begin, leaving behind a farewell letter. The tragic death of Johna Berry contributed to changes in criminal law. From that point on, DNA samples from suspects were collected immediately after their first arrest and entered into a nationwide database rather than waiting until formal charges were filed. As a result, the number of DNA profiles in the database increased significantly, and the new regulations helped other families in their fight for justice. That's all for now. Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed the content. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones, and stay safe.